What do you think of as adult education? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to City Lit?
So for me, I think I probably have the broadest view of adult education. I think there's a danger, lifelong learning, adult education. Those of us who are in the sector have a whole series of different versions and nuances which goes back through government policy, various bits of lore and legend. I'm probably quite uninhibited about my view of adult education. Adult education should be educating anybody really over the age of 18, 19 years old, right through the whole span of their life. I mean, for me, education is a thing that should weave as a very close thread through every different stage of your life. And we in education should be trying to work out around those specific stages what is the best way to engage and how can we support as many people as possible.
So what would you describe those different stages as?
Well, I think there's that initial transition between school education and work. Now, at the moment, it's mostly occupied by the universities and general further education. But actually what you're doing is you're starting to educate young adults at that point. So for me, I think universities do a fabulous job. Our colleagues in general further education do a wonderful job. But there is other space there for 18, 19-year-olds where traditional academic studies is probably not the best route for them. And having them lost to education for maybe decades is a real shame. So I think there is a part there as that transition into work and preparing people for a lifetime of work. I think you and I both discussed in the past that what I consider probably the seminal book of the last decade, which is Andrew Scott and Linda Grattan's The 100-Year Life. If you look at that, is saying the average child born today in the West is likely to live for 100 years, 50% of them will live to 100 years. If that's the case, your work is probably going to be 50, 55 years of that kind of 20 to 75 age. And if that's going to be the case, then the idea that you kind of leave education at 18, 20, 22, and then you're somehow primed and ready for the world as it is for the next 50 years is insane. Of course people need top-ups. So you've got that initial kind of engagement piece as people leave schooling. And I think that's very important. I think that needs to be revisited about how we approach all adults at that point.
Because it isn't traditionally what's seen as adult education. That leave school, move into adult education isn't what people think of.
No.
We think of adult education as something that people return to. So that's quite a new idea, really.
Yeah, and I think that's a bit where we get so many people coming to City Lit, and I'm sure when you're at Northern College you have the same, of people going in their 40s or possibly 50s, oh, if I'd only done this 20 years ago, my life would have been different. And there's a real kind of cry from the heart of what did I miss? I think we really need to challenge our own assumptions that you kind of go away from education and then to return. I'm not saying returning isn't a bad thing, but I just feel as if you probably should never have left. I think education should be something literally that is the whole part of your life. I think, as just mentioned when we were mentioning about the 100-year life, the bit that's also interesting is that right, that's that initial part of adulthood. But with the massive changes in technology and the massive changes in the nature of work, adult education probably has more to say than it ever has done in the last 100 years. If you look at a 40-year-old who has worked for 20 years, qualified or moderately qualified, has been working in a sector, that sector disappears.
Yes.
Hundreds of thousands of jobs in retail are going to go, accountancy jobs are going to disappear with AI. All of the nature of work is changing and going to continue to change. If that's the case, you're married, you have children, you have a mortgage, are you really going to step out of the work environment for 3 years and go back to university or back to traditional college? Acquire debt, don't earn any money and have all the responsibilities you have? No, you're not. The chances are you're wanting to have something that's flexible that allows you to keep your skills going during that whole period. So that for me is something that's really critical. It's something that's been around for a while. We all remember the kind of times when people would set up call centres in old mining districts, but that's a very unsophisticated version of what could be an enormous part of social good going forward, of how do you constantly reskill and retrain a flexible workforce to keep this country at its best. And then the final stage, which I think is interesting, is the whole nature of retirement. I think about my grandfather retired on his 65th birthday, and it was literally from working 6.5 days a week to not working at all. Within a year, he was sick. Within a few years, he was dead. It was that, and there's a lot of stuff over the years to say that kind of cliff edge approach to retirement is really dangerous. And you see a lot of the stuff in the work and the research around mental health, particularly actually of men at the moment. The suicide rates in men over 50 is this re-gearing in society is really quite problematic. Now, if you look at the way flexibility around retirement started maybe over the last 20 years, I think that will only accelerate. The idea that the lucky few that can retire at early 50s, that's becoming less as the economies change. But people are also now retiring as late as their mid-70s. So there's a 20-year span of when you can retire. And also, the approach isn't necessarily that I stop working on a day and then I suddenly have the rest of my life without work. This idea of weaving a different type of mix of work and leisure time is really quite exciting for me. I don't want to retire at a day and then do nothing apart from go around the garden and do the potting shed or whatever.
Watching television in the day.
It just drive me and everybody around me insane very, very quickly. I think the idea of readjusting my life when I retire and doing other things is great. Now, actually, education has a huge part to play in that readjustment. It's not only a thing that people can do, but it also helps people make that transition. And I know certainly the enormous amount of feedback that we get from a lot of our daytime students at CityLit are people who have taken or are taking retirement. And actually, CityLit has helped that transition enormously for them. So for me, actually, all aspects of life, right up until our older students, some of whom are in their 90s, actually getting up, going to CityLit, having a community, actually interacting with people of all different ages, there's something truly marvellous about that and life-affirming. And I know I've talked quite a lot recently, is that my mother died of dementia-related causes recently, and I do feel very strongly that keeping an active mind throughout your life, particularly in later years, is really important to good overall well-being, not just mental but physical well-being. So for me, I actually think we've got a lot of good reasons to keep adult education in its broadest terms and actually trying to help all elements of society.